Welcome to the Always Be Testing podcast. I'm your host, Ty DeGrange, and I'm really excited to talk to Jon Blair today. What's going on, Jon?
Hey, what's happening, Ty? It's not too often that I get to talk to someone who's not that far away from me physically, but virtually, right? I'm usually talking to people on the other side of the country, but it's always nice to talk to someone local in the Austin area.
Absolutely. We got a couple of Austin Texans here, and also we got a performance marketer, and Jon brings with us a ton of CFO and finance experience. So all things D2C finance, we're going to dive in. We're going to talk about it. It's going to be fun. For those of you who don't know Jon, just want to give a bit of an intro. So he's the CEO of Free to Grow CFO. Did I get that right?
Yep,
It's
free
a
to
it's
grow
a it's a tongue
CFO.
twister. But he's been CFO, Chief Operating Officer at a number of D2C brands. He's seen a ton of reps in D2C. So maybe you can kind of just kick off by giving us your background from your perspective and how you kind of got into things.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually started originally going to business school in a place in Central California called Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, and I went to school to get an accounting degree, but I always wanted to become an entrepreneur, which is funny because the accounting departments in the business schools around the country, they're all geared to become a Big Four public accountant, right? Go work for one of the Big Four CPA firms. And so all my business school cohorts were like, well, what are you doing here in the accounting program if you're going to be an entrepreneur? And I'm like, I get it. I understand it. I enjoy it. And I like the finance and accounting piece of the house. And so right when I graduated, I immediately went against the grain and I went to go work for, honestly, a crappy paying job, 15 bucks an hour, to be the accounting manager and all things right hand man of a local entrepreneur. So I was, depending on who I was talking to, I was the accounting manager, the logistics manager, the marketing manager, the customer service manager. But I was the right hand of the serial entrepreneur who, at the time, this was back in 2009, he was selling product D2C. He had an electrical background, and he would go out there, find these little white spaces in these niche markets in consumer electronics. He would engineer the product, go to a factory in China, get them to make it, import containers, and sell them direct to consumer on his website. And back then, 3PLs weren't what they are today, and we did a lot of the pick, packing, shipping ourselves out of this storage unit. It was like the early heydays of like small time like D2C shops, right? And so working for him, his name was Ron Merritt. Like the entrepreneurial bug was just like seeded in me immediately coming out of college. And he ended up introducing me to the founders of Guardian Bikes, the most recent D2C brand that I was on the founding team of. They had the original founder, Brian Riley. He invented a bicycle brake that prevents you from flipping over the handlebars. We graduated business school the same year, and he launched the business back in 2009, and he needed a moonlighting like finance accounting guy. And so like nights and weekends while I went on and worked at other early stage, fast growing, consumer brands, I was always Guardian Bikes, moonlighting accountant and finance guy. And the dream was like, eventually Guardian Bikes is going to make enough money that we can hire Jon away from his full-time role to come on board full-time. And so fast forward actually 6 years, it took 6 years to get the break from an R&D perspective, like commercializable and actually retrofittable on existing bike brands that like Schwinn and Huffy and those big names. What we found was the company was actually kind of getting like blocked from being mass adopted by these big bike brands because we had pricing power. We had patents on this brake, and everyone else in the bike supply chain has no pricing power. And Walmart and Target grind the margins down of these bike brands to like nothing. And so they were scared to death that the word would get out about our brakes, and they would get forced to like eat $1 to $2 in their bill of materials. And they didn't have $1 to $2 in their margin, believe it or not. And so we decided like, hey, we got to go direct to consumer, and we have to launch our own brand, and we have to tell the story about our brakes and why they're safer. And so we launched Guardian Bikes back in 2016 as a direct-to-consumer brand selling the safest kids bikes direct to your door, featuring our Sure Stop brake system. During that time, I still had a full-time job elsewhere, again, working at other early-stage, fast-growing companies. But we were working on raising capital, and the founder, Brian, decided, hey, I'm going to go on Shark Tank. And so he took a year of diligence. I had to manage all the diligence in the background and everything, but he got on stage, did a deal with Mark Cuban. The plan was like, hey, we close Mark's money. It was $500K. Jon, you come on board full time, CFO and COO, and run all things operations and finance. So it actually took a year of negotiating to close that deal. A year later in 2017, closed the deal, quit my full-time job, jumped on board full-time at Guardian. And from 2017 to 2021, we had a crazy scaling journey where we took this e-commerce kids bike brand from $0 pre-revenue to really healthy 8 figures in just about 3.5, 4 years. And during that time, being COO and CFO, running all things like inventory planning, supply chain management, fulfillment, and then on the CFO side of the house, projections, forecasting, budgeting, cash management, debt fundraising, accounting, I had basically built this playbook of like, what is the underlying structure and tools that you need to scale a fast growing e-commerce brand with intelligence and with confidence. And as you know, coming out of like year 4, I just really was ready for like the next thing. And so I talked to the other people on the founding team and said, hey, I'm ready to move on to something else and I want to start my own thing. And so I replaced myself and, you know, still part owner in the company, but just resigned as an employee. And at the beginning of 2021, I was doing some soul searching after taking a couple months off. And I was like, you know, where my heart lies at that beginning, earlier stage where you're in like early stage of an emerging brand where things are growing really fast and they're kind of chaotic. You don't have all the systems and processes in place. You're like building the plane while you're flying it, right? And so many brands in that situation, they don't have a CFO. Their bookkeeper cannot provide the forward-looking insights and recommendations that are needed to help the CEOs and founders fly the plane, right? But the other challenge is you don't need one full time, and nor can you afford one full time at that stage. And so I decided to found Free to Grow CFO. And what we are is we're an outsourced finance firm that works exclusively with growing e-commerce brands. And our e-commerce fractional CFO and bookkeeping services, what we do is we give e-commerce brands the finance expertise that they need to scale alongside healthy profit, cash flow, and confident decision making, but without all the full-time overhead of having a full-time in-house finance team. And so fast forward to today, it's a little over a year and a half later since I started Free to Grow CFO. It's, you know, been a huge blessing that it's caught on like wildfire. I now have 2 more CFOs on the team, a co-founder and business partners, one of them, and a third. And then a lot of my accounting team from Guardian Bikes has since followed me here. And we have a whole back office e-commerce accounting team. And what we're just finding is we've just found a really fun place to come alongside visionary leaning founders who are usually product oriented, marketing oriented, sales oriented, and we can give them all the insights and the visibility that they need to make those scaling decisions with confidence instead of like out of fear, not having numbers and insights to really help guide where they go. So that's a little bit about where I came from and where I'm
That's
at
awesome.
today.
Very cool. I love that. There's a ton in there to kind of unpack and talk about, a ton of directions we can go. So congratulations. And I love just hearing the journey. It's really impressive. Maybe reeling back the clock a little here and thinking back to the genesis, you know, starting out in accounting. When did you know, even before that, that entrepreneurship was just like your jam? How did you kind of uncover that even before college?
I always had a crazy idea. I had started t-shirt companies. I'm born and raised in Southern California, so huge skateboarding culture when I was an adolescent. And so I started skateboard companies. I made my own decks by buying I sourced blank decks, and I literally created stencils and spray painted our logos on them. I figured out how to make stickers by like printing our logo on Avery labels and literally taping over them. My lamination was like clear packaging tape, but then like cutting them out with stencils, right? And like, none of those things ever made money. But you fast forward a little bit further, I'm also a musician. I played in bands my whole life, and I actually, when a year after I graduated from business school, my band that I started, actually a thrash metal band, we got signed to a record label, and I took 6 months off from even working for Guardian nights and weekends to record a record and go on tour. And there's nothing more entrepreneurial than trying to make a living in a band. You're just a marketing company. You're a content company, right? You're a content marketing company, and your content is your music, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you're an apparel brand, right? That's all. And so I've always been an entrepreneur, and like the how I always knew like in my heart that I needed to be an entrepreneur is like, one, I always hated working for other people. I love working with teams and on teams, but I hate being boxed in, my creativity being boxed in. It drives me insane. And I hate being told we can't do that, right? I'm like, no, we can, it's possible. And I've always just gravitated towards being a leader. I was the one who like, hey guys, let's go play baseball at the park. There's no baseball stadium. Well, let's get 4 things that could be bases, and let's get this and let's get that. Like, I was always the one rounding people up to go do something or get something done.
I love it. That's really cool. That's really cool. Now, in your story there with the Mark Cuban funding of Guardian Bikes, you had a really good comment that the negotiation took a year. Now, was that for you or is that for Mark Cuban?
So, I mean, look, Mark was a fantastic partner to Guardian Bikes. I still to this day feel very grateful. When I wasn't on the show, but the other 2 guys on the founding team who were full-time were on the show, but I worked for the company, was a part of all the diligence and like the strategy. And going into the show, Mark was our first choice. Like, we wanted Mark if we had the choice, right? The other 2 founders did a lot of research on like who the best sharks are and why. And like, so he's was and has been a fantastic partner, but he's also a very sophisticated investor and businessman. And he has a team that is incredibly sophisticated. You're not negotiating with, some guys that are just going to make it a walk in the park, right? And truth be told, they were pretty transparent with us. They told us like, hey, listen, we already had raised a couple $1 million. The company had been around for 6 years. So we'd already raised a couple $1 million in seed funding, and already had sophisticated investors on the cap table. And so we couldn't just take any terms, right? We had people who had put 7 figures into the business and so like we definitely had to do right by them. And Mark's team told us most of the people that we work with that come from the show, they have nothing. They maybe have put their own money in. They'll take whatever we give them, and they're not sophisticated enough to negotiate this stuff. And so like, they're not trying to take advantage of you, but they're also doing what an investor would do, which is put an investor friendly deal in front of you, right? And so
Of course.
we were backed by a really solid legal firm, Cooley, out of
Yep.
and their emerging businesses division, and had already raised money from sophisticated investors. And so we had to come at it. And truth be told, Brian Riley, the CEO and founder from Guardian Bikes, like, he is an incredibly intelligent person, and I consider myself a pretty good negotiator now, but I'm really good at negotiating debt deals. That's my specialty, but he taught me a lot about how to think about equity deals. And like, there's just a lot of stuff to go through and a lot of little gotchas. Like, they can approve this, and if this happens, they have that right. And I mean, the documents are no joke. When they delivered them to us, there was 4 different agreements. It was well over 100 pages of language. So like, that's why it took a year.
Of course. No, I love that background. Now, looking back, seeing the path of Guardian Bikes, do you think that the team would have gone through the Shark Tank experience again if they had their choice?
Yeah, I think so. What's interesting is that like the Shark Tank experience is vastly different depending on what I will say, not the Shark Tank experience. I will say what the Shark Tank, if you think of about the episode as like a top of funnel, like marketing event, right? Which is really what it is. And there's reruns and the episodes get sold to another network and they rerun years later. Like we still have reruns today of the original episode and sometimes in other countries. So like there's this recurring top of funnel awareness campaign basically going on. It's always been fantastic. But in terms of like every time one of those goes off, what kind of sales impact is there? For Guardian Bikes, very little because the AOV is $350, right? But when you have like Squatty Potty probably crushed it because you buy it for $19.99. What we learned is like when you have a low AOV impulse buy product, every time it airs, you'll see a huge spike in sales, right? And we would always see a huge spike in traffic. Sometimes we wouldn't even know a rerun was happening, and we go log into Shopify and we're like, whoa, why did so many people hit the site yesterday? And not that many bought. The conversion rate's down, but a bunch of people went to the site. And you would Google it, and lo and behold, there was some obscure
Hmm.
network in another country rerunning our
Yeah.
episode. And so like it was all, there's a lot of awareness. A lot of people, it forced us to figure out how to do email capture because at the beginning we really sucked at email capture. We didn't even know, we didn't get the value of that. And all these people go to our site from the episode, but then they're gone, right? Like if I don't get their email, they're gone. It's like they don't exist. And it's like, no, what you sold is what you sold, and you hope they come back. And so we started figuring out like, hey, we got to capture people's emails. We got to get email flows built out, and we've got to email them regularly so that we're top of mind. And then all of a sudden, Q4 holiday season, we get a bunch of purchases. They do our exit survey, and lo and behold, all these people found us on Shark Tank, right? So in one respect, it's a challenge because it's like this ghost segment of traffic that you have like no visibility into, and they just show up to your website and like pass through, and you're like, they either buy or they don't. And you're like, damn it. But it really forced us to figure out like, how do we get people to give us their email and provide value to them? Because the other thing about our product, a $350 bike is a premium bike. And from being a parent, like you buy some really high price premium stuff for your kids, but then there's other stuff that you're like, I'm buying the cheapest thing because they're going to destroy this, right? And so a $350 bike is not something that people just go impulse buy. You have to sell them on the value, right? Over
Yep.
time and go like, hey,
Yep.
it's this much because your kid's safety and the brakes and this, and how much is their safety worth? But you don't get that point across on one website visit, right? And so it
100%.
really taught us a lot about how to capture an email and build a relationship and prove out the value of our product over time, so that when there was that birthday or that whatever, like bar mitzvah or that Christmas, then bam, the purchase gets made, and they
You
buy a Guardian bike.
you're sounding like a marketer as well as a finance guy, which I like to hear.
In the e-commerce world, if your finance people don't understand something about marketing, that's a huge impediment to the business, because advertising is the lifeblood of your margin as you're scaling. And in the D2C ecom world, you have immediate data feedback, right? And like, so you can't make decisions only from a financial lens, or you'll trick yourself into making decisions that are actually suboptimal in the long run.
Nice to hear from a finance person. I think it's going to blend perfectly into our conversation around that collaboration between finance and marketing. Before we get there, I'd love to dive into, you've seen so many interesting reps, from Guardian Bikes to Free to Grow CFO with all the D2C brands that you see and work with. What are some of the learnings? Obviously, always be testing and learning is a huge theme for us in this discussion in this pod. What are some of the learnings you've seen that you really want to share with the audience?
Yeah, so there's a lot, but the ones that come to mind immediately, like the first one is something that I didn't coin this, actually a prospect I was talking to that I'm still nurturing to this day. And I used this in a LinkedIn post, and someone was like, that's an amazing analogy. And I actually tagged him. I said, no, this comes from this guy. But it's this concept of the LTV piggy bank, right? And like what the LTV piggy bank is that you can trick yourself into making your margins, thinking your margins are getting better by just shutting off ad spend. And if you have people already in your funnel and you have some sort of recurring purchases, your margins all of a sudden look super fat because you're not spending anymore on new customer acquisition, and you're still getting purchases because you're cashing in the LTV piggy bank, meaning that the LTV piggy bank has a finite amount of money in it, right? You're taking out like a quarter at a time as your existing customer base is repurchasing from you. But if you don't fill that piggy bank back up with ad spend that acquires new customers, eventually your LTV piggy bank will run dry, and you won't care that your margin looks really great because revenue will dive so incredibly fast that you're going to be out of business. And so the learning there is you have to dial in. I would even say that like new customer acquisition isn't more important than LTV and vice versa. They are equally important, and you will always, as you're scaling an e-com brand, have to work on balancing the two of those. And there's going to be periods where your new customer acquisition is going to be more of your revenue. And then there's going to be periods where LTV driven repeat purchases are more of your revenue. It's never going to be in perfect balance, but you're almost like, as you're scaling, you're always fighting to keep those things in balance, right? And as soon as they're in equilibrium, you reach a ceiling on a channel or a ceiling on a product line, or you reach some sort of a ceiling in your marketing mix, and then you have to recalibrate, right? The balance between new customer acquisition and LTV. And unfortunately, in the wake of like in the aftermath of the iOS 14 updates, so many brands are like, Facebook doesn't work. And you know how I know it doesn't work? I cut my ad spend and my profit soared. But 6 months later, those brands were like, dude, we got to figure out how to start spending on Facebook again because like sales dried up. And it's because they just rang in their LTV piggy bank for 6 months. And the problem is you get back on spending for new customer acquisition, going from zero to where you were 6 months ago can't be done overnight, right? You have to build it up a little bit at a time, and you've got to have fresh creative ready to go. You got to have the whole process ready to go. People think that ad buying, this kind of leads me to another trap or learning that people think ad buying is just hiring someone who's like understands how to use the platform and understands the bidding system and understands top, mid, and lower funnel metrics. Like that couldn't be further from the truth. It drives me insane, and it hurts my heart because I have some clients I love who like have been burned by agencies in the past. And so they think the only way to go is to just save money on a single ad buying freelancer. And I'm like, guys, we can't do that. Like someone's got to be working on the landing pages. Someone's got to, and iterating and learning and going like, hey, this change didn't work. Someone's got to be iterating on the creative. Someone's got to be sitting there not working on any of that stuff and saying, the audience I'm trying to talk to, what is the hook in the ad that's even going to get them to click, right? And then once they get to the landing page, how do we expand upon that hook and get them to a CTA where they'll land somewhere where they can buy something? And so the point is that like, I think there's this trap out there. No, there is this trap out there that like, that ad buying isn't holistic. It's not a whole process and a system. It's just either a talented ad buyer or a crappy ad buyer. And the reality is marketing is a system, right? And it's a system that unfortunately, whether you like it or not, it's always freaking changing. As soon as like you think you're at cruising altitude, something shifts. And you've got to be on your toes ready to go. And you better have new creative ready to go. And you better have resources ready to start iterating on your landing pages or whatever. Like, and so like it's a process and it's a system, and there are multiple players that have to kill it, and it never stops. It is a feedback loop, and it never, ever ends. I think a lot of brands think like, hey, we updated the site, we updated these landing pages, we put fresh creative out, autopilot now. But while that stuff is being tested and you're killing the losers and scaling up the winners, you literally have to be working on the next round of creative and landing pages and everything that you're going to launch months from now. And so I've seen even very talented brands scale up to like 50, 60 million and get comfortable with their marketing mix. And then all of a sudden it stops working and they were not ready with the next round of fresh stuff that they were going to pull in, fresh channels, fresh creative, fresh landing pages. And so they actually, revenue took a dive for a couple months. And it took them 2 to 3 months to get all that stuff built back up and then deployed. And so you just can't ever stop, and it's a system.
Yeah, such a reminder and essentially a call to action for really diversification and just having some things ready and teed up and having some of those experiments. And I couldn't agree more. The system is what we live and breathe every day. And we've seen the movie so many times with brands. It sounds like we've seen a lot of similar things. In terms of like the metrics, right? From the CFO's view of a D2C brand that's growing and trying to figure things out, what are some of those really core metrics that you want to keep a pulse on and making sure that they're healthy and headed in the right direction?
So more and more, we are focusing from a P&L perspective, more and more we are focusing on two things. And these aren't the only two things that we work on, but these are the two that don't lie. You might have to double click into sub metrics of this if they're heading in the wrong direction. But how is ROAS, or marketing efficiency ratio, which we like to call MER? Some people don't call it that, but marketing efficiency ratio takes forever to say. So how ROAS or MER are moving in correlation or not with contribution margin dollars. Because, and the reason why you have to look at both of those is because ROAS can go down and contribution margin dollars can go up. And contribution margin dollars from a profitability standpoint is what you should be optimizing for. If you get zeroed in on only ROAS or MER, you can actually make decisions that hurt your profitability. Oftentimes when MER and ROAS are going up, so is contribution margin dollars. But there's a point where MER starts coming down as you're scaling ad spend. And if you're able to scale revenue volume higher than your MER or ROAS drops, you actually can generate more contribution margin dollars. And what a lot of people don't understand contribution margin dollars are, they're the dollars that are left over after fulfilling and paying for marketing to fulfill an order and get it to the end customer. It's the dollars that are left to pay for your fixed operating costs. And then once contribution margin dollars pays for your fixed operating costs, every dollar of contribution margin dollars goes directly to your bottom line profitability. And so I have seen brands successfully scale up ad spend so fast that, yeah, their MER and ROAS comes down, but they scale up revenue so much faster through scaling ad spend, it generates more contribution margin dollars. And the thing is, contribution margin dollars are going like this. Your fixed overhead is staying like this. And so what are you seeing? That delta is a bigger and bigger gap. And that's your profitability. That's your bottom line profit dollars. And so we watch those two like a hawk, because if they're going in the wrong direction, then we get into the metrics that are behind those to figure out why they're going in the wrong direction. I'd say the other one on the P&L, obviously we're looking at fixed overhead trends as well, because if you see fixed overhead stair stepping up with contribution margin dollars, then that gap between the two is staying the same and your profit isn't going up. You're scaling margin dollars, but your profit's staying the same. And so like MER and ROAS, contribution margin dollars and fixed overhead tell the story that we need told from the CFO perspective. And we do something kind of unique on contribution margin. It's actually really unique. Other CFO firms don't do this. We split out contribution margin into two different sections, actually three. We look at gross margin, which is gross margin is just product costs. So what's your margin after just product costs? Then we look at what we call contribution margin before marketing, which is what is your margin after product costs and fulfillment and credit card fees. And then we look at contribution margin after marketing. And because we have those 3 different metrics, we can time series each of those out. And when I look at those graphs, we build dashboards for our clients that graph those. When I look at those graphs, I immediately can say contribution margin went down and you have a fulfillment problem. Or marketing's doing great, fulfillment's great. It is your product cost that's killing you. Or product cost of fulfillment, fantastic. Marketing is killing you. And so we're able to diagnose that really fast with the way that we break out contribution margin into those 3 different segments. And then on the other side of the financials, on the balance sheet cash flow side, we're always looking at what's called the cash conversion cycle. And the cash conversion cycle basically measures how efficiently you're managing inventory, receivables if you have receivables, and then payables. And basically, the more days of inventory you have on hand, or the more days it takes to collect your receivables, or the less days it takes to pay your vendors, your cash is not sitting in your bank account. It's sitting on warehouse shelves, or in your customers' bank accounts, or in your vendors' bank accounts. And so we have time series graphs in the dashboards that we build and connect to our client's accounting system that shows how inventory days are going up or down, AR days are going up or down, and AP days are going up and down. And what we can do is say, hey, look, we're profitable, but you know why you have no cash? Because we just keep stocking more and more and more and more inventory. And so all our profit is sitting in our 3PL. Or, guys, we're paying our vendors in 3 days. Is there any way we can get payment terms and pay them in 30 days? Because that means the cash sits in our bank account for longer. And so we look at a lot of things, but the major things we look at are contribution margin, fixed overhead, MER and ROAS, and the cash conversion cycle.
Love that. It's similar to kind of some of the macro metrics that we look at as an agency. And a lot of times we're getting into some of this counsel with clients ourselves, talking about measuring MER and ROAS over time, measuring contribution margin, and seeing what that impact is. So it's really great to hear. It's really great to kind of understand how you're counseling D2C brands on ways to be more financially healthy, which is huge. It helps us. We're speaking a similar language, and everything we do, we want to be profitable. We see a lot of brands that are doing things incorrectly in the finance vertical, so this is really helpful. Maybe a good segue into kind of what we talked about previously, into the importance of kind of that developing that partnership between performance marketing in particular and finance. Obviously, some of those key metrics that you're looking at are part of it. I'm curious to know, in particular, like around running tests, like, the elasticity test on have you reached a ceiling in a channel or not, getting a correct attribution set up, running an incrementality test, something we've talked about a lot on this pod. I would love to maybe hear some learnings that you've had around areas like that of performance marketing, and we can get into other ways that finance and marketing can kind of partner together. But I would love to hear, maybe some other learnings you've had in some of those other areas. It doesn't have to be those exactly, but curious to learn
For
more.
sure. Well, yeah. So one is thinking about omni-channel pricing and testing omni-channel pricing. And specifically, there's a lot of like brands we work with that are Amazon and Shopify, or Amazon and direct, right? And maybe you have a little bit of wholesale, but putting that aside, just looking at looking at your Shopify or D2C store and looking at Amazon. Worked with a lot of brands that do testing of like what happens when we offer different prices on the 2 different channels, right? And also what happens if we scale up. This is kind of like an incrementality test. We've done a lot of incrementality testing on Amazon where it's like, hey, we're spending $2 million a month on Facebook. Certainly there's cross-channel bleed over, right? Not every single one of those people is buying from our .com store. And, most brands tend to allocate their top of funnel spend to the D2C P&L. And so the D2C P&L looks much crappier than Amazon does. But you can do, done incrementality tests where like cut spend for a period, top of funnel, scale it back up and see what happens on Amazon. It's very clear that they're connected, right? And so like you need to look at both channels P&Ls, which we help them set up and maintain from as their fractional CFOs, but also keep in mind that like you need to look at the blended margin as well, because there's 100% bleed over from that top of funnel spend, right? And so it comes back to attribution too, is that like attribution obviously is a super huge problem depending on who you talk to. I've got a bunch of different marketing resources who would tell us they have the perfect attribution stack. I tend to think doesn't exist a perfect one. And honestly, like, I don't think you have to have a perfect one. I think you have to have a way to look at attribution from multiple perspectives and ultimately be able to tie it back to the P&L and see what's happening with contribution margin dollars at the end of the day. That is what matters. Contribution margin dollars, end of story. That is what hits your bottom line P&L. So like nothing else really matters. That is the result from a marketing standpoint. Contribution margin dollars is the bottom line from a marketing standpoint. And like, so, I would say like in terms of learnings, one, make sure you have channel P&Ls. If you have an Amazon store and a .com store, you cannot run your business looking at one aggregated P&L. You should look at aggregated P&L and you need to look at the blended results, but you have to have separate P&Ls, and you do your best to allocate ad spend to the right, to the channel that it's directly driving. But realize, go test it yourself, do an incrementality test, scaling up and down spend, and look at the channel that you're not attributing that ad spend to. It's going up and down also, right? And so there are also some other things I think there are some people who like really hate the thought of like looking at, like some people hate the concept of MER. They're like, it's just lazy. And I agree. Like you have to still look at platform. People complain all the time about platform attribution, and like, is it imperfect? 1,000% it's imperfect, right? But if I see a platform attribution telling us that certain ad sets are killing it, and I'm seeing revenue increase on the site and contribution margin dollars are going up, it's still pointing me in the right direction, right? And at the end of the day, contribution margin dollars and MER are telling me really how efficient I am at the company level. And so and some people don't agree with this, but I think about using the platforms for directional, call it tactical moves, right? Tactical moves on a particular ad or ad set or campaign. And like that tells you the story of whether you should keep, kill, or scale something. But then you have to go back and look at like your entire marketing mix and calculate MER and contribution margin dollars and see if that directional indicator from the platform is showing up in your financials. And I can tell you right now, I rarely see those two things diverge. Now, if the Facebook platform says I'm getting a 5 ROAS, my MER might only be 3. And so it's not giving me the right number, but it is when I see that 5 go to a 5.5, the MER for the entire company is going up also. So it is directionally accurate. You just have to take a step back and look at your whole marketing mix to assess how it's actually impacting your margin.
Yeah, I love that. And there's so many, margin, MER, ROAS conversations that we're having. So to hear you speaking similar languages, counseling clients that really need help in D2C e-com is super helpful. And kind of just building on that, like to work, what have you seen that really you love to see from performance marketing teams and the right types of in-house marketers and agencies and CMOs and VP of marketings and head of growth? Like what's really worked well? Obviously, there are some things that you and I have gone through and experienced, but I'd love to get your take on how do you build that appropriate partnership between finance and marketing, and maybe identify when it's not optimal and what can be improved and fixed.
I mean, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but step one, like the most important thing is I consider myself someone as fractional CFOs for e-commerce brands. One of our primary jobs is to be the connective tissue between marketers and bottom line profitability, and here's what doesn't work, but I will tell you most CFOs do. like cross their arms, hit this ROAS target. If you don't hit this ROAS target, cut spend back. That's not what we do. We try to get the marketers to understand the connection between what they do and increasing contribution margin dollars. And so when a marketer asks me, "Hey John, is this ROAS okay?" What is my next question always? Well, how much can you spend at that ROAS? Because if you can only spend $10,000 a day, like that's not okay. But if you can spend $50,000 a day, yeah, please, that ROAS is fantastic. We're gonna crush it. Bottom line profitability. So like I spend a lot of time connecting what the marketers are doing, their metrics, their funnel metrics that they're looking at back to contribution margin dollars. And that just has to be the North Star. Unless there are some exceptions, it's that like, hey, we're willing to take a contribution margin dollar hit, but in service of more contribution margin dollars later. So like when I've had some ad buyers who are like some of the best out there that I've worked with that come to me and say, "Hey John, I want to break even in October, but here's what I'm going to do in November to make that all back." And like that is actually a very sophisticated strategy, and it's not a bad one. And there's a number of reasons why that is a good idea. Let's spend into the holiday, and let's be at an elevated level of spend so that when the holiday buying frenzy starts, you're already up here. You don't have to scale up starting November 1st from down here, right? And so when I hear guys who also come to me and say, "Hey, look," when they're actually talking to me about the difference between first order profitability and LTV payback period, that again, I love to hear, because that is a real strategy that if you know how to do it well, crushes it. And if you understand it, you actually start thinking about how to build your product line around it. Like some people don't have a product line that will even work, right? But like, hey, how could I potentially break even on my first order and get to a 50% margin 2 months in through repeat purchases? What products would I have to launch to make that possible, right? And so like,
Yeah.
what I hate to hear, oh, go ahead.
What do you hate to hear?
What I hate to hear is like, just look, everyone else in the market's gonna be discounting. Let's do a steep discount and let's just try to spend $100,000. I'm not against discounting at all, but in service of what, right? And
Yes.
to generate what, right? And so
Yeah.
anyways, the classic just, "Oh yeah, I can spend whatever you want. You just got to tell me what ROAS you're okay with, but I can spend whatever you want." When I hear that, that's just a lazy ad buyer.
Yeah, 100%. We see that a lot, and I feel like um, that dogmatic, overly simplistic view is what is not the right way to do it. What you're saying, there needs to be, a method to the madness, to the surge or the pullback or the approach to hit a particular ROAS or MER and the volume goals. And is that tied to product line? Is there some strategy around when your competitors are doing it? Is there some seasonality approach to it? I think that excites me to hear, and I think that there's just an opportunity to be more nuanced about it. There's too many brands and folks that think about it in a very like I think overly simplistic way, as you said.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's amazing. That's amazing. What are some things that looking ahead, with holiday wrap up of year, plans for next year, planning from a finance view from D2C, other kind of things that you're counseling clients on, or maybe trends that you're seeing in finance and in general in D2C? What are some of the maybe headwinds and tailwinds to be considered in this space?
Yeah, for sure. You know, I think a lot of what I'm counseling clients on right now are I would say that the top topic right now, without a doubt, is that October is a terrible month, just generally speaking. I have one client who's killing it, but it's because they sell goth clothing and October is like their Christmas, right? But they're the only one. October's just a crappy month because people are just all, for most consumer products, because people are saving up for the holidays, right? They're starting to look. That's probably why Amazon did a second Prime Day in October, right? Like they want to try
Hmm.
to flatten. They want to try to like bring that valley up a little bit. And I've
Hmm.
seen it for years and years and years and across a bunch of brands. And here's the challenge: you have big goals for November and December. You've already committed to your inventory for it. It's not all here yet, but it's on its way. And you already have to start thinking about Q1 and Q2. You haven't even sold through all of that inventory, and Q1 and Q2 is right around the corner. And depending on your manufacturing lead times, you have to start committing to orders with your vendors, and you don't even know if you're going to hit your goals for November or December or not. And it is hands down, it's the most stressful time of the year, every single year in the e-com world when you're growing, because if you want to hit your goals in Q1 and Q2, you have to purchase even more than you did last year, and you don't even have the data yet from Q4 of this year to tell you whether or not you're on that trajectory. And so I'm counseling my clients a lot on like, what are some risk mitigation strategies? Because scaling a brand is placing risk adjusted bets, and a CFO should be an expert at placing bets that don't have unlimited downside. That's what a day trader does. A fantastic day trader doesn't just go make trades. They have stop limits that limit their downside. There's like unlimited upside, but limited downside, right? And that's a risk adjusted bet. Poker players do the same exact thing, right? And a CFO should help you place bets that, yes, have risk, but always help you minimize or stop the downside risk. And so things that you can do from this inventory planning dilemma perspective: make sure you have the right lender in place with the right debt that has the right payback period, that you can stock up a little bit extra and you can pay it back next year once you get done with Q1 and Q2. And if you get a little bit overstocked, you just hold on future purchase orders while you sell through that inventory, pay back the loan, and then place your next orders. Other things you can do: you can split the difference of risk and go, I'm going to buy 50% of what I want to, and I'm going to tell my vendor like, hey, I might buy up to 50% more. And when's the last possible day I can place that order, and just keep them in the loop, and maybe release small incremental orders if you start seeing the data go in the right direction. But you're committing to the smallest possible purchase that you feel comfortable with, instead of just placing an order for the home run all at one time and you're stuck with it, right? Also, working with brands to think about, hey, actually, you might want to air freight that stuff in. And yeah, air freight is freaking expensive, but your lead time can be reduced by, 4 weeks. And so you're going to take a lower gross margin, but you're going to reduce the risk of having all your cash tied up in too much inventory. And so let's place an ocean order for some amount that we feel comfortable with, that it optimizes our margin. And then let's place small air orders if we're beating our forecast. And yeah, our margin's going to go down, but we're not getting too heavy on inventory, and we're still driving incremental contribution margin dollars. So like, there are ways to, when you have if you have CFO perspective, they're guiding you, there's ways to place bets, but limit your downside. And I'm doing a lot of that right now from an inventory planning standpoint.
Love that. Love the limiting of downside concept. I mean, John, this was jam-packed with information. So much to talk about in the CFO realm, in the performance marketing realm for D2C. I think I think we could almost do like a monthly or quarterly, like that's how deep dive you went and just went off. This was awesome. So thank you. I do have one last personal question before we wrap up. What
Absolutely.
instrument did you play in your band?
So I play guitar and sang. I still, right over here to my left, I still have my recording studio. I still write and record metal. I'm not in a band, but I write and record and still sing. And it's just a hobby I've had since I was 5, and I think I'll do it till the day I die, even if I never step foot on a stage ever again.
That's amazing. That's so cool. What are any good metal influences that should be considered, or any metal that
I mean,
inspired you?
yeah, I mean, I mean, all the classic thrash bands like early Metallica, and I'm blanking right now, but Anthrax, and even some, like, there's some newer bands or even like Pantera, newer bands like Kill Switch Engage, and even a little bit of Slayer. I'm not quite so much into like their spiritual ideology, but their music is incredible and just was way ahead of their time. And so I'm just a sucker for really fast, heavy, but at the same time melodic music. And so I don't think I'll ever. Yeah, I was originally a piano player, classically trained, and classical piano is very metal in terms of like the underlying music theory. And so I think I just never came off that thread as I became a guitar player.
That's amazing. Love that. Love that. Music's come up a number of occasions on this pod, and love to hear your background and all your inspiration in music. And I love to hear that you're still doing it. So thanks so much for joining us, man. This was chock full of tons of information. For those interested to follow you and learn more about what you're working on, where would you suggest they go?
Yeah, so you can follow me on LinkedIn, Jon Blair. You can also follow our firm on LinkedIn, Free to Grow CFO, our website, freetogrowcfo.com. And you also follow us on YouTube. All of our video content makes it onto YouTube, tons of helpful tips. And, you can find us under Free to Grow CFO on YouTube. So, yeah, and I'm even the kind of guy that throws out there. If you want to email me, John at freetogrowcfo.com. Happy to be of service.
Excellent, John. It's so awesome to see you chat, get into detail on all this fun stuff, and a lot more to talk about. We'll see you on the next one.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me, man.
Thank you.